What's up, guys? Welcome back to Tidal Gardens. It has been a very long time since we've done kind of like a building walkthrough, largely because a lot of the stuff to me sounds like there's not a whole lot different, but I think that over time, a lot of these little things do kind of accumulate. So we can just start at the front of the building and work our way back, and I'll just point out a couple things here and there. The first thing I'll point out is that we use these Rubbermaid stock tanks now for coral intake. Now, this isn't like a long-term quarantine solution for us or anything like that, but it allows us to bring some stuff in and just kind of let it settle down. It's really tempting just to bring everything in, dip it like crazy, and then get it into another tank. But really, it's that first day where the corals are going to be most sensitive from all that travel and everything like that. So if you could just wait a day or two, just let it settle down, and then start our dipping procedures and all that stuff, it really helps out a lot. So a lot of the corals that are in this little tub here, a lot of it doesn't even go into long-term quarantine for the farming setup. A lot of it will just make its way to the greenhouse next door, and we'll just sell it as what you see is what you get or something. But that is kind of the new thing. Obviously, we have some Kessel lighting. We just run a micron filter and a heater, and it's a very, very simple setup. And we don't really have to do much in the way of cycling or anything like that because it's only going to be running for about a week. Okay, moving into the building a little bit more, we have this 150-gallon tank here. This has gone through many different rebuilds of sorts. Initially, it was going to be a really nice quarantine system for SPS and things like that, because the height would give us enough height to put in some really, really strong flow in there, and the size of it would give some stability, because quarantining Acropora, not the most fun thing in the world. Turns out the depth of this tank was such a negative in terms of maintenance that the acros just didn't even do well in here anyway. So over time, it's transitioned into an Aiptasia farm for berghia nudibranchs. And right now we do have a lot of nice chunky nudibranch boys doing its thing. And we're gonna be selling some. We're gonna be moving them across all of our different systems. So any system that did have Aiptasia in it, this will kind of give it a hard reset as far as the nudibranchs go. Now, it is not the nicest thing to have first thing when you walk into a coral farm. It's a very unsightly aquarium. So we are going to be using what used to be our fish quarantine system, which is a triple-decker thing, because it wasn't great for a fish quarantine, but it might be great to grow Aiptasia in. It's in the back corner of the building. It's something that we can neglect. And neglected tanks, turns out, they grow Aiptasia pretty well. So this guy, once it's done with this first phase of berghia nudibranch farming, we are gonna turn it into something else we haven't quite decided. We've dabbled with the idea of growing gorgonians to take advantage of the height. We've dabbled with the idea of a lot of large leather corals that are kind of occupying space next door in the greenhouse. I'm even thinking about maybe doing a very low light, low temperature LPS tank, and we can kind of shoot a lot of what you see is what you get in here for that. A lot of possibilities with this. No decisions have been made just yet. But in the meantime, it is growing a ton of berghias right now. So hopefully we'll be able to get those on the site soon. Okay, guys, next up, we have the only actual running quarantine system here at Tidal Gardens right now. And I'll suss that out a little bit later. I told you before that the big tank that we wanted to do quarantine in is now an Aiptasia farm, not a quarantine setup. So this is the only one that's really doing quarantine work. And what we've got going on in here is a ton of rainbow micromussa. I've been pillaging everybody's collections for these things. For the first time in a long time, micromussa have been doing really well in here. Every now and again, micromussa tend to be a little bit more sensitive than people give them credit for. And so sometimes we just have entire batches that just don't really do very well. Luckily, we've been very stable with them for the past several months now. So I've been going out and collecting all the different rainbow varieties. Very excited. So these guys have like a little while to go yet in quarantine, but so far so good. We've also been collecting some different types of Goniopora, and we have 2 wall hammers for the Fimbriophilia show tank. It's been kind of a process to reintroduce some variety into that show tank, which I'll show you that a little bit later. But we got a cool splatter hammer, and we've got a really neat like mauve peach type hammer. So excited to get those guys through quarantine as well. But this is the only actual quarantine, and I will go and show you what's happened to the other quarantine that we've got. This was the other small quarantine tank that we were running, and you can see kind of what happened here. We had a couple of these Nexus burst anemones. I think we started literally with 1. It's grown since. They were doing so well that this kind of just became an anemone tank over the years. These anemones have done so well in this profile aquarium that we're thinking about possibly turning the other quarantine tank into something like this for just a different variety. But then we wouldn't have a quarantine tank at all anywhere here. So that's kind of problematic. It's about a 60-gallon aquarium, and I am like really stunned at how well bubble tips do in an aquarium like this. Funny thing, we have a clownfish in here. I don't like clownfish. I don't even remember where we got this clownfish. I think it was a rescue from somebody's tank. Anyway, he's so extraordinarily mean that when the guys have to grab one of these anemones to ship it out to a customer, they have to catch him in a cup, set him on the Eurobrace, then do the anemone business, then reintroduce him into the tank. Every single time. He or she has the run of the whole tank and has hundreds and hundreds of anemones to keep him or her busy. So yeah, it would be nice if we had more in the way of quarantine tanks here, but at the same time, having like a tank full of Nexus bursts, not the worst thing in the world either. Okay, next up is the Neverending project section of this building. So we've got a couple of things going on. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to be doing at all. My friend Sagi, he runs a YouTube channel called Tech Gear Talk. I've brought him up before. He's on his way to 1 million subscribers now. He's doing great. 15 years ago, he was in the reef aquarium hobby. That's how we met. And he had kept a couple of really old acrylic aquariums and a really old poly sump. And he says, do you want this stuff? Because I just need this out of my garage. I'm like, sure, I'll take it. And I'm not sure what to do with it. They're awkward sizes to one another and awkward size to this big sump. I think that he might have had like a bigger glass aquarium that was a grow out tank or something like that. All this used to be in his basement a long, long time ago. Now, you see that all this stuff is in fairly rough condition. I'm not the biggest fan of acrylic, but one nice thing about acrylic is you can make this brand new. It takes a lot of elbow grease, but it can be done. So one of these days, when I get extra motivated, I can make this gleaming, brand spanking new looking. Since I don't really know what I'm going to do with it yet, not a high priority. I think this is like polypropylene or polyethylene, I don't know exactly, but this sort of like 3/4 inch sump material is extremely pricey now. So again, this is 15 years ago when he originally got this, but it's a nice big chunky sump. And it has a lot of different chambers, pretty versatile. One little curiosity though is it's got like these really small, what looks like filter sock holders, but they kind of couldn't be filter socks because they're too small for a 4-inch, obviously too small for a 7-inch. But 15 years ago, there might have been filter socks that fit in there, or maybe kind of some media cylinders or something, I don't know. But I don't have any plans to use it, but it was just kind of like a curiosity from way back when. Last thing I'll point out is we have this metal stand. And the idea behind this is that next door in the greenhouse, we have a really nice custom aquarium from Miracles in Canada. And that tank is extremely poorly utilized out there. It's super gross, super neglected. We basically treat it like it's a 300-gallon Rubbermaid stock tank. And it would be nice to dress it up as the show tank that it deserves to be. So we've got this aluminum stand all ready to go for it. And the sump is actually kind of appropriately sized for it. So we might be doing something with that combo later. But again, these are all just these random, super long-term projects. I was thinking that we might have gotten this aquarium done in July. I was like forecasting way the heck out when I said July. It's August now, and there's no signs of this project happening, but that's the kind of pace that we work at here. We have a lot of things in the queue, but a lot of stuff that's in the queue isn't super high priority. But eventually all this stuff will be done. But out of curiosity, if you guys have any thoughts or ideas of what to do with these tanks, I'm all ears. Maybe we can turn them into quarantines. Maybe we can turn them into anemone tanks like I was thinking about. I'm even talking to Alufab, the stand company. It's like maybe we can come up with some Frankenstein monster of a stand that incorporates all this and actually makes it make sense. I don't know, we'll see. But moving on. We have our two species-specific show tanks to my left and right. This is the Fimbriophilia show tank, so this is all the hammers and frog spawn. And as I mentioned before, we have those two wall hammers in quarantine that are waiting to come into this tank, which will be like a really nice addition. The hammers and frog spawn that are in this tank are doing crazy, crazy well. They're filling up the space super nicely, and it's getting to the point where when everything is fully extended, you can barely see rock, which is kind of what I was going for. This tank here, it's become an anemone show tank of sorts. These are all Colorado sunbursts. It might not stay a Colorado sunburst tank, however, because again, I would like to probably isolate them into a smaller anemone tank, kind of like what we have with the Nexus bursts, and then repurpose this for another show tank entirely. Because as much as I kind of like this anemone look, I really think a more striking display could be done in this tank, especially with Ganies. Like I've become like a huge Goniopora freak, and there's so many really cool varieties, and I really like the idea of having two tanks that are kind of flowy with large polyp stonies that are executed completely differently. So we would have like hammers and frog spawn here and have Goniopora here. So it has like kind of complementary aesthetics, but a completely different coral theme going on. In an ideal world, all of these anemones would make its way out and Goniopora would populate this entire tank here. One can dream anyways. Let's talk about the sumps for just a little bit. I am so late to this party, it is ridiculous. I've been in this hobby for between like 30 something to 40 years. I legit lost track. But filter socks, so late to this party. For like the longest time, mechanical filtration was one of those things that was kind of poo-pooed in the reef aquarium hobby. It's like, just, you know, have like live rock and blah, 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 right? Whatever. But when it came to like a farming system, there are some major benefits to having extremely fine micron filtering going on. And so our latest sump, we actually did do something with integrated filter socks. But our original two big systems here, it didn't have anything for filter socks. So we kind of had a retrofit, custom made to go into here. And so now these systems here now have 6 filter socks. Like this sump is still kind of dirty looking, but it has gotten so much cleaner as we go. It's crazy. It is not the most fun thing in the world to go through this and have to clean them every week, but we have a process now. And like I said, the more that we clean, the longer it takes between cleanings. I can tell that the show tanks themselves and the farming tanks that this is all attached to, it's just getting more and more and more polished. There's like fewer piles of detritus building up, all of that stuff. Big fan. Haven't done the filter roller thing yet. Don't even ask about it. Haven't done it. But I'm good with filter socks right now. I'm tickled that it's gone so well. Just as an aside, the red filter sock silencer things on top there, those are 3D printed. And what's kind of cool about that is that it's slightly buoyant. So when these filter socks get kind of clogged, those things float up and away. So you always know when these things desperately need to be changed. Early on, we were changing these like, I don't know, every 3 days, but since then, it's about once a week. And once we get to about once every 10 days or so, I think that'll be like its equilibrium point as far as cleanliness. So we're on to the farming tanks. Not a lot to say here, to be perfectly honest. We've been slowly revamping the collection that's going on here. I'm super happy with how everything is. Like once we added those filter socks, a lot of these tanks started getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. So I'm very encouraged by that. A lot of like little like weird issues that we had in the past, they're so in the past that I kind of forgotten all about them. This whole system is basically on cruise control, and that's how I like it. I like things to be very boring around here if at all possible. I don't like, wow, we're getting explosive, crazy new. Like, something's wrong. Like something's gone completely nuts if it's just gone off the rails like that. No, this is super boring stuff, and that's the way I like it. The only thing that I think would be nice to do long term is to revamp our closed loop systems. Right now we have 2 pumps, 1 intake, 1 output, 1 intake, 1 output. It'd be really cool to have a single, much bigger pump so we can have 1 big intake and 3 outputs to further distribute the flow. I might do that project later, and when I do it, I'll kind of like explain closed loops again, because I think a lot of people were still confused about closed loops even after I did my first video on it. When you have like a very long, like 10-foot tank, it becomes more challenging, especially like a peninsula tank, to get flow to the opposite end of the tank. Because unless you want to like bolt on very obtrusive looking power heads and stuff like that, you kind of have to get more creative with your flow pattern and flow engineering. So that's kind of like why in an application like this, closed loops really shine. So yeah, long story short, things are cool. If I'm going to change anything, it would be kind of like on the flow infrastructure and logistics. So yeah, stay boring. I'm all good with that. We haven't talked about this tank in probably a year at least. This is our SPS show tank. Here at Tidal Gardens, the tanks that get neglected the most, by far, not even close, are the show tanks. So we're talking about like the Anemone show tank, the Fimbrofilia show tank, the Peninsula show tank, and this SPS show tank. There are weeks that go by where I don't even look at this thing, to be perfectly honest. It turns out that I'm much less of a stickhead than I thought. I don't care about acropora in this aquarium. It happens, great. So one nice thing though is that at one time we were getting like some wonky like RTN. I think that since we've been doing a lot more with like the micron filtering, we've been doing a lot more active dipping and stuff like that. We've actually isolated each thing so it can be removed and dipped, because previously we glued everything down to the rocks and that wasn't great when something goes downhill. So once we were able to isolate and treat these guys, yeah, it solved pretty much all those issues and it's been growing in nicely. That's the good news with this tank. The bad news with this tank is, do you guys remember a little while back I did a video on alkali glass corrosion? One of our farming tanks, on one of its like 3-foot panes, started to haze. It is a permanent etching of the glass. It's a whole thing. Watch that video. This tank has it now too. It's on a 2-foot by 4-foot pane. Luckily, it is facing the back corner of this building, which nobody really cares about. But it is so super frustrating to have a pane here and a pane there start to permanently etch. But hopefully it is the only 2 that will happen this way. These things happen, I guess, right? Anyway, that is in a nutshell the first update that we've done in a good long time. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Happy reefing.